In the year 1157 AD, a group of Crusader knights buried one of their own with a precious jewel cradled in his hands in London. Fast forward to the present day, where many other Crusader tombs are discovered underneath the city's catacombs. Dr. Henry Jekyll, an expert in ancient history, ventures into the tunnels and stumbles upon a particular tomb adorned with hieroglyphs. Upon deciphering the markings, he realizes that the tomb belongs to Princess Amenet. Through a series of flashbacks, Jekyll recounts the story of Princess Amenet. She was a cunning warrior who had her sights set on becoming the next pharaoh after her father, Meneptah. However, her plans were thwarted when her father's second wife gave birth to a male heir, making him the rightful successor. Desperate to gain power, Amenet made a deal with Set, the god of death, to grant her dark powers in exchange for her soul. In a fit of rage, she murdered Meneptah, his wife, and their infant son. Amenet then planned to use a special dagger in a ritual to give Set a physical body by sacrificing her lover. However, the pharaoh's priests stopped her and killed her lover, leaving her to be mummified alive. Her sarcophagus was then taken away from Egypt and hidden in a tomb where it would never be found. Nick Morton and Chris Vale, two reconnaissance soldiers, are heading towards a village that is under attack by insurgents in Mesopotamia. Nick is excited for some adventure, but Chris is against it. Despite Chris's objections, they head down to the village and come under fire. Chris orders an airstrike to take out the insurgents, and as the bombs are dropped, a large hole opens up in the ground. Nick and Chris nearly fall in, but they manage to grab onto a chain and descend into the hole. Inside the hole, they discover the tomb of Amenet. When their superior, Colonel Greenway, arrives on a helicopter, he reprimands Nick and Chris for going off on their own. Soon after, an archaeologist named Jenny Halsey shows up and confronts Nick for stealing a map from her. Despite their disagreements, Nick, Chris, and Jenny all venture down into the tomb. As they explore the tomb, Jenny notices that the Watcher statues are facing inward instead of outward, and the sarcophagus is held down by chains and submerged in mercury to weaken evil spirits. Nick, however, shoots a chain, causing the sarcophagus to rise. He then sees a vision of Amenet thanking him for freeing her. Meanwhile, a swarm of camel spiders crawls down from the walls, and Chris is bitten in the neck. They decide to bring the sarcophagus to the surface. Everyone was flying home on a plane when suddenly, Vale began acting strangely. His skin turned gray, and his eyes became discolored. He started to try to free the sarcophagus from its restraints, and when Greenway tried to stop him, Vale stabbed and killed him. Vale then moved towards Nick and other soldiers, and Nick had to shoot him to protect everyone else. As Nick and Jenny went to the cockpit, they saw a flock of crows crashing through the windshield, killing the pilots and causing the plane to crash. Nick gave Jenny a parachute and helped her escape safely, but the plane crashed with everyone else still on board. Later, Nick woke up in a body bag at a morgue in London and found Vale's ghost standing beside him, telling him they were both cursed. Meanwhile, Jenny was asked to identify the bodies of the deceased, but was shocked to see Nick alive. At the site of the crash, the rescuers discover Amenet's sarcophagus and lifeless body. As one of them gets closer to investigate, Amenet unexpectedly drains the life out of him and his partner to restore herself. She then harnesses her powers to transform them into undead slaves. Nick and Jenny are in a pub. While Nick goes to the bathroom, he sees Vale's ghost talking to him again. Vale warns Nick that Amenet has chosen him for a reason. Suddenly, Nick gets scared and runs out of the pub. Unfortunately, he ends up in an alley where he is surrounded by a bunch of rats crawling all over him. As he sees Amenet crawling towards him, Jenny comes to the rescue and snaps him out of his vision. Jenny tells Nick about the hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus and what she learned from reading them. She knows about a dagger that belongs to Set and a jewel that must join it to complete a ritual. She tells Nick that the jewel is buried with the Crusaders in London. Nick and Jenny visited the tombs of the Crusaders and found a valuable gem in one of the coffins. However, as they were trying to leave, they were ambushed by Amenet and her army of undead slaves. Despite the odds, Nick and Jenny fought back and managed to escape the tomb. They fled in a van through a forest while being pursued by Amenet and her minions. During the chase, an undead slave broke through the van's windshield, causing it to crash and roll down a hill. Although Amenet tried to capture Nick, she was stopped by a hook and taken down. A group of rescuers arrived just in time to save Nick and Jenny from danger. Nick and Jenny are brought to a place called Prodigium, which is located underneath the Natural History Museum in London. As Nick walks through the area, he sees some interesting things like a skull with fangs that might belong to Dracula, and a scaly forearm that could be from the creature from the Black Lagoon. He meets a person named Jekyll who tells him about Amenet and the evil forces that exist. The facility is focused on finding and containing these dark forces. Aminette is held captive and subdued with mercury being pumped through her body. Nick approaches her and listens as she talks about a ritual she tried to perform on her lover. She tries to convince Nick to join her by promising him complete control over death and the chance to become a living god. Aminette calls upon a camel spider to enter the ear of another agent in order to free her from captivity. Aminette escapes and grabs the dagger and the jewel. Nick and Jenny run away from the facility while Aminette starts causing a sandstorm in the city. Nick and Jenny are running through the tunnels when they come across more of Aminette's undead servants. They engage in another fight, with Nick forcefully removing or tearing off their heads. Suddenly, an undead minion pushes them into the water, but they manage to defeat it. Nick and Jenny swim to the surface to catch their breath, but Aminette seizes Jenny and pulls her beneath the water. Nick fights off additional undead creatures and desperately attempts to rescue Jenny, but tragically, she drowns. Nick retrieves her lifeless body from the water and is confronted by Aminette once again. He decides to destroy the precious jewel, but Aminette tries to manipulate him into joining her cause. To deceive her, Nick extends the dagger towards her as if offering it, but instead he plunges it into his own body, becoming possessed by Set. Now possessed, he engages in a fierce battle with Aminette and ultimately delivers a lethal kiss to drain the life force out of her, reverting her to a lifeless corpse. Nick then rushes over to Jenny and shouts at her to wake up, miraculously bringing her back to life. Afterward, he mysteriously disappears. Jenny meets up with Jekyll again while Aminette's body is put back into a special box filled with mercury. Jenny starts thinking about what will become of Nick now that he's technically become a monster. Jekyll reflects that it needed a monster to defeat Aminette, but there's still a chance for Nick as long as he holds on to his human side. Meanwhile, Nick has revived Vale in the desert. They hop on their horses and head out for another exciting journey, with a sandstorm trailing behind them. That's it, guys. If you want to see how a mortal took Zeus' power and become a god, or how this scientist cloned Jesus' DNA, then watch this next.